Asian century. However, some may say that Asian age is not as blossomed as expected, and it is already on a downfall. So now, what is causing the instability in the Asian economy? So, coming out from the economic crisis, it was traditional for Asian nations to have a conservative governments with strong leading power, so it can pull out from the economic crisis. So many countries have surprised the world with rapid growth of economy done in such short period of time. It is called an Asian miracle. So giving government dominant power was beneficial to post-war damage, but in modern society, now there are arguments that big governments might not be as effective in economic growth anymore. So giving government the power to intervene in economic decisions may result some unwanted restrictions on businesses, slowing down the economic growth. So especially having one dominant leading group will give easy availability for either passing or not passing certain bills that could result in economic stagnation, since the leading group would shoot down any oppositions. So in the recent years, there has been some movements to shift away from such dominant government. So in a recent event of Japanese government passing legislative bill for enabling Japan for having an army, there was a revolt in Japanese younger generations outside of the parliament, which was a surprising act because often Japanese younger generation they're often perceived as quiet and submissive. So it kind of shows how Japanese younger generations are now more interested in the political change, and they are actively participating. And in Korea's case, the result of last election was a surprise for a lot of the people, because Korea for a few years had conservative majority governments, but after the last election, which was actually happened in this year, the conservative majority party ratio kind of turned into more of a three-party ratio. So you can see the difference between the year 2012 and the 2016. So another challenge that Asia is facing is corruption. So I just want you to guys to look at all the words that there are. So it's quite a lot. So that's just how many subjects that are linked to corruption. So when corruption happens in government, it allows other sectors that are outside of government branches to corrupt as well. So there could be corruptions in education sectors, or health clinics, or judiciary, or the most easiest one would be the corruption in the private sectors. So, according to the transparency.org, so in 2015, South Korea scored 56 out of the 100, ranking at 37th on the list of the cleanest country from corruption, and China ranking 83rd, and Russia was 119th, Japan coming in 18th, and Singapore was the highest Asian nation on the list actually. They scored 85, coming in 8th place. However, the last country to come on the list was North Korea, scoring 8. I mean, which really isn't a surprise. So, proportionally looking, you can see most of the top of the list is dominated by the European countries. So Asia as a continent, we still have a lot to work on. And also another thing is that citizens trust on the government on enforcing a successful policies against preventing corruption is rather low. Like 50% of citizens in South Korea believe government's policies are ineffective, and in Russia 52%, and Japan with 45%, and even Singapore had 31% of citizens feel that government is not doing their full potential on preventing corruption. So there's another thing to work on.
Is corruption. From here, 2 countries are free from the name of corruption, but unfortunately 2 countries, including Korea itself, is not that free from corruption. Then what kind of problems will corruption make? If you look here, I could have part from Transparency Organization on how corrupt the world is. And unfortunately, it looks like Asia is quite corrupt. So what kind of problems will corruption make? Oh, sorry. Transparency for Asia is needed because it is a step forward for economic growth. Corruption is a deadlock. It's a shackle that deteriorates the Asian economy. Europe, Asia are all relatively considered free from corruption. They are also treated as one of the advanced economies in the world. Corruption and economy is closely related to each other, and it needs to be disconnected. Corruption not only hinders economic parts of our life, but it also harms the legal system, economy, political system, administration. Corruption hurts democracy and the economy itself. Then what should we do to stop corruption in Asia? NGOs need to have a more keener look on how corrupt a country is, and need to stop politicians or other people from being corrupt. Citizens need to have also a keener look. Citizens need to have responsibility for their democracy. And also corruption is one of the factors that is deteriorating democracy. Also, campaigns on the negative side for corruption need to be done by NGOs so citizens can feel the responsibility on their democracy. And also, there should be no more impunity. In some countries, people get free by money. They think corruption and also money is a jail-free card, but nobody in the world is above the legal system. And also, Asia is no exception. Also, it in some countries in Asia, corruption is done by civil servants because they do not get enough wage. What can we need to make the wage more higher in a more suitable level so they know they do not need to get corrupt. Another picture here is the European Union. Why did I say get the European Union flag in an Asian while we came here for Asia? In the recent years, there was an economic crisis, and all continents were affected. Asia was affected. North America was affected. Africa was affected, but Europe was relatively free from this economic crisis. And also, why could this happen? Because they were united as one. Asia is a continent with long history of interacting with each other. But the problem is, it wasn't positive. Unfortunately, the interactions were usually negative rather than positive. War, territorial conflict, historical interpretation problems, and so on. The world is shifting from government to cooperation and governance. And the European Union has showed that this governance and cooperation model is where the world should be heading. And that is one of the reasons that Asia needs to be united as one. I'll show you a picture right now. I'm quite sure everyone here knows the Avengers. I'm quite sure everyone except, I believe, these two who use a MacBook and an iPad Pro. Except for those two, everyone probably uses Windows or your cell phones. They're probably iPhones or Androids. And why? Why did I suddenly came out with those companies? Let's look at these companies. PlayStation from Japan, Xiaomi from China, and Samsung from Korea. What are the differences between these two? Avengers, Microsoft, skip the Avengers, sorry. Microsoft, Apple, and Android. They are all software companies. And unfortunately, PlayStation, Microsoft, and Samsung, all of these are manufacturing companies that make phones. They have very, very weak power on software. And why is this so important? Recently, the company that made this green little robot had also made another very interesting product that will change the world. What was it? Oh, AlphaGo. I'm not sure if a lot of people watch the AlphaGo thing, but it's an AI program that was developed by Google, and also it has one human on playing a game of games of Go. What does this mean? No longer manufacturing will be done by people. Asia will no longer be able to sustain its economy by doing manufacturing. AlphaGo has proved that now, sooner or later, robots are better on making things, and they are also more cheaper and faster. Then what should Asia do? Oh. Now Asia needs to move to the second economy to once again go to,
including the People's Republic of China. Is this on? Yeah, okay. The Republic of Korea and Japan, as well as many other countries in Asia, have seen rapid economic growth. And a lot of this economic growth coincides with demand for electrical power. And this is because many of the nations in Asia are starting to move to an industrial manufacturing-based economy as opposed to agrarian. And heavy industry requires electrical power to power the factories, which are part of the rapid economic growth in Asia. Okay. So in 2011, China became the world's second largest economy, surpassing Japan. This is supported by extremely rapid economic growth, actually steady economic growth. There was a 127% increase in GDP in the period between 2008 and 2014. This also coincided with an increase in 67.16% in fossil fuel generating capacity. This includes all fossil fuels such as coal, petroleum, and natural gas. And as of last year, late last year actually, 155 new coal-fired plants were planned in China. So this shows the increase in electrical power in the past from 1980 to 2014, and as you can see, there's an extremely rapid growth starting around the year 2000. Going back, this is the graph with increase in GDP growth, and as you can see, in the period between 2006 and 2016, in the past decade, there hasn't been any negative growth. In fact, it's always been positive, above 6%. The only time it actually, the rate of decrease was in the late 2009 after the 2008 recession. So as you can see, it's been extremely rapid growth, up to a maximum of about 15%. Going on to South Korea. South Korea also has had relatively steady GDP growth, including 68% in the 5-year period between 2001 and 2006. Again, this coincides with an increase in 60% of generating capacity, mostly through fossil fuels. So again, in the period between 2006 and 2016, there was one period of negative economic growth, again in 2009 after the recession. But otherwise, there's been at least some economic growth year by year, although again, not as extreme as China. This is increase in energy capacity. Again, it's increasing, especially after 2008. Although there was a slight decrease during 2009. And finally, going to Japan. Japan actually has the least steady economic growth out of the 3 nations I just mentioned, including several points of recession in the past 10 years. Notable, however, is the decrease in generating capacity after March 2011, which I'm sure many of you know we had a major earthquake in the Tohoku region. Because the aftermath of the earthquake caused 6 nuclear reactors to be completely decommissioned, which led to a drop in generating capacity. However, the generating capacity decreased, but in the past several years, there has been an increase in demand for electricity, including 38% for household, for regular use, as well as 25% in industrial use for heavy industry. As you can see, there's been several points of negative growth, recession, notably in 2009, again, the result of the recession. But also in 2011 and 2015, there has been some recession, although Japan has recovered each time. But again, out of the 3 nations, Japan has the least steady economic growth. So this is the number of nuclear reactors in the world, planned and under construction. The reason I'm pointing out nuclear reactors will be apparent later, but as you can see, there's a major increase in construction of nuclear reactors in the late 1970s to the early 1980s. This is because of the first oil shock in the Gulf region. The price of oil increased, which made fossil fuel plants more costly to operate because they import oil from the Middle Eastern region. So there's an interest in nuclear power generation, which was thought to be more economically stable because of the lack of need to import oil from a relatively geopolitically unstable region. However, after the 3 Mile Island accident in the eastern United States and
economic development, and because of this, the region, the Asian region, will have to develop more and more energy, and they will also have to store more and more energy in order to avoid shortages. And this is called in environmental science traditional energy security, which means that the way they used to do. But now we need to know to think about the new normal, which is like considering economic development and energy use in terms of environmental problems. So here on this slide, we can see on the first one the sectors that use the most energy sources to function. So industrial is the highest one, commercial is the second, and transportation and residential the last ones. And then after that, you see that how much the world has been, because of economic production has been rapid the past 10 years. So the future,
those life cycle emissions of pollutants and greenhouse gases. So graph on this left side shows the medium of life cycle emissions of different types of energy. And the median of nuclear energy's life cycle emission, as you can see on this graph, it's 12 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour of electricity generated, and then it is much less than that of renewable energy such as hydropower and solar power. And the only energy source which emits less carbon dioxide than nuclear energy in its life cycle is onshore wind energy. And so we can say that nuclear energy can be considered as a form of clean energy. And another advantage of using nuclear energy is for people, specifically for people in Japan who live in towns or cities where nuclear power plants are located. And it is that the nuclear energy brings positive economic impacts to those people. And it is quite obvious that there is always a high risk of having nuclear power plants close to your house, because if accidents happen in the plants, then the area surrounding them could be polluted due to radiation, which could endanger your life. So to compensate for such risks, people in those towns or cities with nuclear power plants are provided with grants by the Japanese government, and they also receive tax revenue from electric power companies. And this chart shows the government grants. One example of this is Tsuruga City in Fukui Prefecture, and this chart shows the government grants that this city receives annually from 2004 to 2007. And these grants are used for infrastructure such as road maintenance, and it is also used for providing health facilities and welfare facilities for elderly people. And this chart shows the fixed assets tax revenue that this city receives annually from 2004 to 2007. And each year, more than 50% of the tax revenue is derived from this fixed assets tax, which electric power companies pay for the plants. And because of the abundant financial resources, this city never suffers from deficits, unlike other cities in Japan. And as of 2005, the population of Tsuruga City was about 70,000, and approximately 1/5 of the population are people aged 65 years or older, and there are about 34 to 35,000 workers in this city, and approximately 1/3 of the working population are employees who are engaged in nuclear energy-related work. So therefore, it can be said that nuclear energy provides a younger generation with jobs, which make them more willing to stay in this rural area, and it can solve the problem of aging population.
So now that we've seen the advantages of nuclear power, I'd like to show you exactly what nations are doing in terms of promoting nuclear energy. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a resurgence in nuclear power in the past several decades. But one of the reasons that there is the resurgence is because of emerging new reactor technologies, as well as selling nuclear reactors and reactor technology abroad. So first, talking about China. There are currently 64 nuclear reactors under construction or planned for construction in the immediate future. In addition to that, in the latest 5-year plan, the 13th 5-year plan in China, there are planned for 100 new nuclear reactors within the nation. In total, this amounts to seven construction projects per year for about $100 billion worth until 2030, which is about 15 years in the future. And the total is about over, I believe it was $10 trillion in total between now and 2030. Also, China is heavily investing in selling nuclear reactors, including one in the United Kingdom, with possibly 2 more additional contracts if the first one goes through on schedule.
Social mobility. In the case of Myanmar, we argue that the reforms undertaken by the Thein government has not been effective because of the prevailing conflicts, as it diverts resources away from economic purposes. in order to suppress conflicts. And secondly, ethnic conflicts reduces the state capacity and hinders the ability of the government to implement reforms. And lastly, the ethnic conflicts which create instability discourages investors from investing in the country for the long term. I'll first give a brief overview of the political and economic landscape of Myanmar, and then Michelle will explain the reforms under the Yonsei government and how some of the reforms are being adversely affected by the ethnic conflicts, and then I'll give a conclusion. And so let's get started. Myanmar is a multi-ethnic and multi-religious state. It has 135 different ethnic groups such as Chin, Kachin, Karen, Mon, and Rohingya. In terms of religious composition, it has the Buddhists takes up the majority of 89%, while the Muslims and Christians each take up 4% of the population. Ethnic conflicts have plagued Myanmar for as long as it has existed as an independent nation. The seeds were so long before Myanmar attained independence in 1948. During the World War II, Burmans had sided with the Japanese invaders as the Japanese promised them of the independence, like they can rule their country and get rid of the British colonizers. But then the ethnic minorities, they sided with the British colonizers because under the British they were being treated better. So during World War II, they fought against each other, and like the slaughtering and the bloodshed in the battlefield just deepened the distrust, and because of the sense of betrayal. And the end of World War II was only the beginning of the start of the civil war in Myanmar. Ethnic situation deepened with independence because the 1947 constitution drafted gave the minorities unequal rights. While there were plans to grant statehood for the minorities following independence, the 1962 military coup led by General Navin stopped the process. Under Navin, the plight of minority worsened because their political activities were suppressed. And the Myanmar under Navin was both repressive and isolationist. The Burmese way to socialism promulgated by this government had isolated themselves from the global economy, so it deprived them of the foreign investments and exports that could have brought about greater economic growth. And indeed, Myanmar has gone from being from having one of the strongest economy before the military coup to being the second poorest country in Asia today. So there are rampant corruption and serious food shortages as a result of this isolationist policy, and this has spurred a massive protest in 8 of August 1988, as seen by that picture below, and it caused the death of 3,000 and thousands more being displaced, and so the resolution of Navin. The next president was Thein Sein. He was the leader from the military-dominated Union Solidarity of Development Party, and it was also under the military rule. But unlike Navin, who isolated the economy, the Thein Sein government promised democratization and opening up of the economy. So you can see that like he met up with the Aung San Suu Kyi, the political opposition, and also he met up with Obama. And yeah. And with these reforms, Myanmar has turned into the fastest growing country in the region. It has an impressive average growth rate of 6.5% over the last few years. Well, this seems to be very laudable, but how effective have the reforms actually been? First start, widespread poverty still exists. 26% of Myanmar's population lives under poverty, and this is compared to 23% in Laos, 13.5% in Cambodia, and 1.9% in India. I'm picking these few countries because they are all emerging markets. And so you can see that despite a high economic growth rate in Myanmar, compared to other emerging economies, they're still having one of the highest poverty rates. So reforms under Thein Sein government is not actually very effective, and this is largely because of the inability to resolve conflicts. And before we see why this is so, Michelle will now explain the Thein Sein reforms.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the reforms that the Thein Sein government has undertaken. So firstly, reform has been underway in Myanmar since November 2010, when the military rule has replaced by a new government. It was backed by the civilian government. In his inaugural address on March 31st, President Thein Sein outlined his plans for sweeping economic and political reforms. He suggested that his policies
but the policies of the past were ineffective and that had failed. So during his first 3 years in office, President Tencent initiated political reforms in the first year, followed by socio-economic reforms in the second year, and then administrative reforms in the third year. And the political reforms were undertaken for the liberalization of the system, as well as economic growth. So the underlying principle of reforms were for economic growth, to lift economic sanctions imposed by Western states, and to open the country for more investment and trade. So, firstly, I'll talk about political reforms. Yeah, so I'll talk about political reforms first. So, the Tencent government invited opposition leader, as we saw just now in the picture, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, to Naypyidaw for an audience with the president, in an attempt to build peace and foster better ties, and improved its relationship with the main opposition party. This was, in further to that, the Tencent government amended the political party registration law and the election law, allowing for opposition to run in elections. Additionally, the Tencent government also released thousands of political prisoners without any conditions attached. This was done to encourage the positive engagement in the democratization efforts and to highlight the path of liberalization that the Tencent government was committed to. Another move in the process of reform and liberalization is the relaxation of censorship and control of the internet and media. Internet controls and censorship were relaxed, and restrictions on international and independent news websites were lifted, resulting in a certain level of press freedom in Myanmar. In its commitment to process again, the Tencent government has provided more space for civil society, the freedom of movement and association for people. President Tencent in 2011 signed a new law on freedom of assembly, and in 2012 promulgated a new law again that allows for formation of unions and grants the right to strike. And lastly, President Tencent has made efforts to bring an end to the decades of civil war, ethnic conflict and violence between the central government. So there are efforts done to try to make peace with ethnic minorities. Following from that, I'll talk about economic reforms. So these are one of the 8 important reforms, economic reforms that the Tencent government has tried to bring about. I'll talk about a few of them. So the first one is the floating of Myanmar's currency. The idea behind the floating of the currency is to unify the country's multiple exchange rates so that businesses and governments can more easily handle accounting and convert money. The floating of the currency that was made effective from 2012 is touted as one of the most biggest economic reforms made by the Tencent government, as it seeks to re-engage with the outside world and to be free from the sanctions imposed by Western states. And then liberalization of trade was done to encourage the participation of the private sector in international trade. State trading was largely abolished in 2011, and other reforms such as liberalization of import and export taxes were also made. Further on, I'll talk about the creation of new foreign investment law. So a new foreign investment law was signed by President Tencent in 2012 to make Myanmar a more attractive destination for foreign investors while protecting sensitive labor. And establishment of a special economic zone. The establishment of the Tilawa Special Economic Zone that was initiated in 2013 is a 150 million joint venture project with a Japanese consortium of conglomerates, including Sumitomo and Mitsubishi. It's one of the several new developments by the Tencent government, and it signals the opening up of Myanmar's economy as it aims to draw foreign investment to Myanmar. So, despite all these political and economic reforms that have been undertaken over the last few years to open up Myanmar's economy and achieve economic growth. There is a stark gap between policy pronouncements and the economic lived experiences of Myanmar's people, both in the countryside and elsewhere. One crucial reason for this ineffectiveness of reforms is due to the ongoing conflicts that has been plaguing the country. So, many of the tactics used by the previous regime are economic in an attempt to starve the people and to...
However, in such globalized world, little can be done unless states work together. It goes without saying that regional cooperation could play a crucial role in overcoming economic tailspin in Asia. By connecting countries, allowing businesses and people to move with greater ease throughout the region, states could contribute to both economic and social development. Progress toward trade and security and energy efficiency on regional basis would bring Asian markets to a new and higher level, new heights. Along with economic alliances that have proved their significance in strengthening of economic cooperation in Asia-Pacific region, such as ASEAN and APEC, new projects are emerging. Sometimes the idea could come from rather unexpected direction. In 2013, South Korea hosted a conference on global cooperation in the era of Eurasia, where President Park Geun-hye outlined her economic vision for future of the region in Eurasia. The proposed Eurasia Initiative is an ambitious plan which aims to change the fundamentals of global politics and economy, make the continent truly one, and reach sustainable prosperity and peace within it. Specifically, plan calls for connecting energy and logistic infrastructure across Europe and Asia. For instance, oil and gas pipelines, rail networks, and electricity grids. Integration should result in the creation of visit-free trade area by gradual eradication of trade barriers. The new Eurasia that is emerging will provide opportunities for new investments and jobs and will offer new possibilities for future generations, proclaimed President Park, during her keynote speech during the conference on global cooperation in the era of Eurasia. The scale of the idea is incredible, with the project encompassing not only East Asia, but a far greater space. Park Geun-hye described her idea for peaceful prosperity in Eurasia as a resurrection of the Silk Road. Despite the fact that Eurasia is a single landmass, its parts has long been isolated and disconnected from each other due to geographical and ideological barriers. South Korea proposes regional connectivity to be strengthened by formation of collaborative mechanism and linking separated networks in the region. What is more, the idea is based on creative economy that relies on information and communication technology and people's creative ideas, especially in science and technology. Eurasia Initiative is there to enhance economic cooperation among nations and give them opportunity to develop and prosper. On the other hand, the initiative is planning to build trust among states through gradual increase in economic interdependence. The first step encompasses an extensions of transportation and energy infrastructure beyond Northeast Asia to the west. As for the Korean Peninsula, creation of new networks could help in the process of trust building in the political and security spheres. It could only not stabilize the situation in the Korean Peninsula, but as well contribute to transformation of Democratic People's Republic of Korea economy.
However, Seoul is not alone when dreaming about bringing together such a vast region as Eurasia. A couple major integration plans are to be mentioned. So, Chinese One Belt, One Road, and Russian pivot to the east. in spite of the fact that Chinese initiative is more similar to Korea's, particularly in terms of resurgence of the Silk Road, resemblance with Russia's initiatives could be found likewise. Korea and Russia seek the status of regional leader, most notably in the economic sphere. Both nations depend on the West politically, which often interfere with their economic interests. Korea and Russia trade with China extensively, but desire to remain equal partners. If implemented, this project will help countries to fulfill their inspirations about integration of Europe and Asia. For many years, Russia, which constitutes the longest transport corridor geographically, has worked on its own strategy of Eurasian integration. Moscow has reached the stage of the Eurasian Economic Union by a number of consistent steps on the post-Soviet territory. In addition to that, Russian government aims at developing Eastern Siberia and the Far East in order to fully integrate into the area of Asia-Pacific region. This could be achieved by means of development of traditionally significant routes connecting the continent, formation of infrastructure and energy supply logistics, and establishment of new industries. The ideas of Korean president were met with enthusiastic response both in Russian government and business community. President Putin expressed his support during an official visit to Seoul in November 13th in 2013 and at 2014 APEC summit in the course of Russian-Korea talks. One of the main priorities of Park Geun-hye's Eurasia initiative is the Silk Road Express, which is to connect Busan in South Korea and Europe through North Korea, Russia, China, and Central Asia. So just from here to go through, start in South Korea to go through North Korea, Russia, and China. Yeah, and also, another route is from China, to Mongolia and also to Central Asia. So, so to Moscow and to Europe. And actually, there is a plan to go to London. Yeah, so that's really interesting. The high priority is also given to the North-East Passage promoted by Russia to make full use of the Arctic Ocean sea routes. It supplements the scheme with the meaning of the Silk Road in the sea. So it just will go all the way here, so in the Arctic Ocean, so to connect South Korea again, with Europe, but through the North-East Sea. As we said before, actually this Silk Road Express could reduce the transportation time from 45 days through Suez Canal to only 14. So now everyone will go just like here, and it will take 45 days. But through Silk Road Express will take only 14 days. So by 3 times reducing the transportation time. One major project, which was to link South Korea to the Trans-Siberian Railway via North Korea, has to be implemented. At first stage, a 54-kilometer railway connecting Hasan in Russia and Port Rajin in North Korea was commissioned in 2013. However, the transportation of Russian coal to South Korea was halted due to new sanctions being imposed on Pyongyang earlier this year. So just the picture over there. So you see, again from Busan, it's a sea route to Rajin. So the port Rajin in North Korea, and it connects with Russia. So Rajin and Kazan, it's in Russia. So this part was already built, and here is just a sea route by now. But the plans are to build a railroad. Therefore, North Korea's foreign policy remains the noticeable obstacle to Eurasia Initiative. It is obvious that South Korea do not intend to risk politically and to reward North for its inappropriate behavior. The agreement on this issue could be reached if the countries return to diplomatic methods and six-party negotiations. Another issue to overcome is the lack of convenient freight logistics and general overload of the Trans-Siberian Railway. Without efficient renovation of railroads, improvement of access and carrying capacity, the Trans-Siberian Railway would not be able to withstand the increasing amount of goods shipped. The proposed plan for the reconstruction of the Trans-Siberian Railway is one of the most promising and expensive infrastructure projects in modern Russian history. In spite of mutual advantages from the modernization, neither South Korea nor China is willing to invest to integral element of the Silk Road. Finally, it should be mentioned that in the long term, Eurasia Initiative is to become mutually attractive for South Korea and Russia. Both nations would benefit from ambitious projects that were proposed. The Eurasia Initiative, if stays afloat, would change the architecture of the region and give the economies new impulse for sustainable development. To conclude with, the excerpt of President Park's speech has to be noted. The creation of a new Eurasia is not simply an ideal or a dream, but a viable goal to achieve. So, thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, we would be pleased to answer them during the discussion time.
Like to, how to say that? Well, to shift from nuclear energy. So, would it be enough, or like?
So you have to turn it off, and then it's turned on here.
We believe that current renewable energy sources aren't sufficient at the moment because they're emerging technologies. However, we believe that future developments in nuclear technologies such as wind, hydroelectric, geothermal will be developed sufficiently to completely replace current energy sources, including nuclear energy. It's also in terms of renewable energy, it's also debatable whether nuclear power itself is renewable. So it is possible that nuclear power would be considered one of the renewable energies in the future, along with geothermal, solar, hydroelectric, and wind power. In terms of actual generation, at present, again, it's insufficient, but we believe that a gradual shift towards nuclear power will allow us to maintain our present demand and supply for electricity while replacing what we have now with green sources. Thank you.
I'd like to add more.
As again, liberals think that the violation of human rights is a big issue. Also, it does point out the potential danger of wrong usage of this particular law. So according to the anti-terrorism law, as the Article 9 says, I know it's a little bit in length, but I'll just read it out quickly. Where there are good grounds for suspecting a person to be a member of a terrorist group or to attempt to commit a terrorism and to volunteer to such attempt, the head of the integrated Counterterrorism Center may collect and investigate information on his, her entry and departure, financial transaction, and use of communication services. So basically what this says is that the government is granted an authority to have a surveillance on ordinary people if they believe that they have a suspicion activity or suspicious goal. So this verse right here is actually very controversial because if you see the head of the integrated counterterrorism is actually the same person who is a director of the National Intelligence Service, and although I'm going to talk about it later in more depth, this is simply giving too much authority to one person for a potential danger of being used in political and personal agenda. and Jian-cha is going to give you some more detailed examples.
Well, what do you guys think about these two pictures? These two pictures actually illustrated by the U.S. journalist, which talked about the security violates one's privacy. So you can see those, the President Obama and the government itself, it watches one's privacy. And you can see there of the President Obama saying that nobody is listening to your telephone calls, but actually back there, they all listen your information and knowledges and other things. So these two pictures sarcastically illustrate that they're actually violates one's freedom. So before we talk about our security versus freedom, I'm going to talk about the history of security and versus freedom. But actually, it was initiated during the Cold War, and which McCarthyism was officially introduced. During the Cold War, every citizen had to be alleged in order to find out communist ideology. So the word McCarthyism is remembered as a modern version of witch hunt, which means like if there is one person who seems like he or she is communist, he or she is suspected to allege, and then they're going to be called by the government. So I'm going to talk about Patriot Act in the U.S., which was introduced after the Terror 9/11.
It would be a good option for Japan and India to make a security treaty. So this security treaty is becoming reality, as there are several high-state visits from 2007 when agreement was made among United States, Australia, Japan, and India. And also Japan-India bilateral security cooperation was signed in 2008. And in 2012, joint training was conducted in Japan. It's a marine Navy, India's Navy and Japan's Defense Force. So to keep the relation good, our prime ministers are working quite well. They're kind of good friends, like wishing happy birthday, and prime minister they only say thank you, but he doesn't really use the Twitter, so so it was a good movement. So as some of the group mentioned, Japan changed the interpretation of the Article 9 of its constitution. So it now can be we can use the collective defense now. So this will enable Japan to strengthen the tie with India in terms of security to create a security treaty, and combination of these two countries, India and Japan, could be a counterpart to China, which can stabilize the balance of power in East Asia to create the harmony and peace up in the region in the world. So now he's going to talk about the economic relationship of these two countries.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the India-Japan economic relationships. This is more to do with, I think, panel 1, but since we can't really separate politics and economics, so I'm just going to talk about this. So just a brief history. So India and Japan has been having a relationship for like about 60 years, mostly trading raw materials such as iron ore and cotton and such. And there are still some trading missions to India from Japan. Just brief. And then the Cold War was actually like one period where like India-Japan relationship wasn't really excellent because India adopted the socialist economic model of the Soviets, while Japan, they had the relationship with the U.S., which was anti-socialist. So this relationship differences really hindered the further economic relationship. But still, India was a strong supplier to Japan in terms of raw material. And so this 1991 economic reform, I'm referring to India. This is referring to India. So this was like a big step for India in terms of lowering trade tariffs and restrictions in trade and investment, which made like economic freedom, liberalization better. And so India had like a monopoly of state on like some industries such as heavy industries and telecommunications, but all of that were abolished and, well, yeah, economic liberalization was, I guess, achieved. But then there were some problems such as tariff lowering takes time, at least to lower below 15% is a little difficult. And GDP deficit, fiscal deficit, and high debt to GDP ratio and all that was hindering investment. And also the private sectors, like private companies and businesses, they weren't catching up to this governmental request. I guess, but then
forms of civil society in Singapore. The first is the horizontal engagement, which represents the relationship with elaborate more on this later in this presentation. And the next form of civil society is the vertical engagement that refers to the relationship between the government and the people. This is a form of civil society in Singapore that should advocate public advocacy and citizenship feedback to governance. However, despite the rise of government initiative, there's still high levels of restriction over public voices in Singapore. We therefore quote Terence Lee's use of the term gestorial politics to understand the vertical form of civil society in Singapore, one that lacks political will in taking in citizenship feedback on governance. We also observe the presence of international engagement that involves the government and international NGOs, where INGOs advocating human rights actually raise Singaporeans' awareness on interaction with the government. Thereafter, we seek reconciliation between the three forms of civil society and examine its implication on Singapore's politics. So the